Back in 2008, you could walk into a Kawasaki showroom, point at a brand new Ninja 250, and ride it home for around $3,500. Brand new, warranty, the whole deal. That little bike taught an entire generation how to ride. Cheap, forgiving, and just fun enough to get you completely hooked. Now fast forward to today. That bike, the cheap, full-size, freeway-ready starter from one of the big Japanese brands, is basically extinct. Oh, you can still buy a tiny budget runabout new, sure. But the real deal affordable beginner bike, the kind that taught your older brother to ride, that one didn't just get a little pricier, somebody killed it. And once you find out who and why, you are not going to be happy. So let's rewind for a second, because to understand what we lost, you've got to remember what we had. For decades, the small, cheap motorcycle was the front door to this entire hobby. You'd save up a couple grand, grab something like a Honda Rebel, a Ninja 250, a little Suzuki, and you'd learn. You'd drop it in a parking lot, pick it back up, and laugh about it. These bikes were light, they were simple, and most importantly, they were cheap enough that a broke college kid could actually own one. And that 2008 Ninja wasn't some stripped-down penalty box either. The folks at Cycle World basically called it about as affordable as a freeway legal bike from a trusted manufacturer could possibly get. It was the people's sport bike. And for years, every major brand had one. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki. They all fought to put new riders on cheap, friendly machines. Because here's the not-so-secret logic. Today's broke beginner is tomorrow's loyal customer buying a $10,000 bike. The cheap bike was the bait. So what on earth happened to it? Now let me be fair here. You can absolutely still buy a brand new bike for cheap. Honda will sell you the tiny little XR150L for around $3,400 or the pint-sized Grom for about $3,600. But come on, those are fun little runabouts. They are not the full-size, freeway-capable machine the old Ninja 250 was. Try to find one of those. A proper street-focused starter bike from one of the big Japanese brands for under $5,000, and the pickings get awfully thin, awfully fast. The cheapest full-size street-focused bike from a Japanese major right now is the little Honda CB300R, and that one starts at $4,500. Want a Suzuki SV650, one of the all-time great beginner-friendly bikes? That will be $8,600, thank you very much. And it's not just the entry bikes creeping up. A flagship Yamaha R1 cost about $11,000 back in 2005. Today it's $19,000. The entire price ladder shifted up, and the bottom rung, the cheap full-size starter, is the one that mostly got sawed clean off. Even the used market stopped being the safe haven it used to be, with prices on good used bikes staying stubbornly high, well above where they sat before the pandemic. So that old advice of just go buy a cheap used starter bike doesn't quite land like it once did. Now here's the sneaky part, and once you see it, you genuinely can't unsee it. The bikes didn't just get more expensive, they quietly got bigger to disguise the price increase. Look at the Ninja. It started life as a 250, then it became a 300, then a 400. And after 2023, Kawasaki killed the Ninja 400 entirely and swapped in the Ninja 500. Same frame, same brakes, bigger engine, bigger price tag. The cheap little entry bike kept getting replaced with a slightly bigger, slightly pricier version, until one day you looked up and the genuinely cheap version just wasn't on the menu anymore. So who's pulling off this magic trick? Time to line up the suspects. Suspect number one is the one everybody loves to blame, emissions law. And honestly, in Europe, the case is pretty open and shut. Over the last decade, European regulators rolled out a series of tightening emission standards. Euro 4 landed around 2016. Euro 5 hit in 2020 and 2021, and the latest, Euro 5 Plus, became mandatory for every new bike sold from January 2025. Each round piled on more required hardware and more hassle. Catalytic converters, fuel injection, oxygen sensors, the whole shopping list. And that latest standard, Euro 5 Plus, is a little different. It's less about a brand new emissions limit and more about forcing bikes to constantly monitor themselves and prove they stay clean for tens of thousands of miles, which, you guessed it, means even more sensors, more electronics, and more engineering. And this is the part that makes it all so brutal for cheap bikes specifically. That technology costs roughly the same to add whether the bike is expensive or dirt cheap. On a $15,000 sport bike, a few $100s of emissions gear is a rounding error. On a $3,000 commuter, it can be a fifth of the entire price. It nukes the whole reason the bike existed. By some estimates, meeting the latest rules added something like $500 of cost to one mid-size Yamaha. On a $7,000 bike, fine, you shrug. On a cheap little learner bike, that's a death sentence. Engineers at the firm Ricardo, the people who actually do this compliance work, said it about as plainly as you can. Cheap bikes cannot afford anything that pushes up the sale price, so they run the bare minimum tech possible. And as the limits keep tightening, it just gets more and more expensive until the business case collapses and they simply stop building the bike. And that is exactly what happened. The Honda CBR 125R, a genuine top seller over in the UK, got axed under Euro 4. The Yamaha YBR 125, a basic, beloved little commuter, gone. The Yamaha SR 400, a gorgeous classic, discontinued rather than updated. And that entire class of cheap, light, two-stroke learner bikes a lot of riders grew up on, wiped clean off the map. And it isn't over either. Engineers are already bracing for some kind of future Euro 6 style standard later this decade, probably with even tougher real-world emissions testing. Now here's a myth worth clearing up, because you'll see it everywhere. Europe's big 2035 deadline to end new gas car sales, that one's aimed at cars and vans. It doesn't actually cover motorcycles. Bikes sit on their own separate regulatory track. But the overall direction of travel across Europe is pretty obvious, and the long-term pressure on cheap combustion bikes really only points one way. But before you grab a pitchfork and storm the regulators, there's a twist. In America, this whole argument barely holds up. US emission standards for motorcycles have been basically frozen since 2010. So if regulations aren't the main villain on this side of the Atlantic, then something else has to be driving these prices through the roof. And this is where it gets really good. Suspect number 2 does not wear a government badge. It wears a suit. This is the one the manufacturers really do not want you thinking about. It is called premiumization, and it is a fancy word for a dead simple idea. Why sell 1,000 cheap bikes for tiny profit when you can sell a few hundred expensive ones and make an absolute fortune? Look at Harley-Davidson. The company has leaned hard into big, premium, expensive machines, the touring bikes and custom cruisers that carry fat profit margins, while basically walking away from the cheap end of the market altogether. And the logic behind it is brutal, but dead simple. A cheap entry-level bike makes the manufacturer next to nothing, so why pour your energy into selling those when a $20,000 bagger makes you real money? The cheap bike isn't just hard to build under emissions law, it's also the bike the manufacturer makes the least money on. And it's not just the factories doing this. Dealerships barely make a dime selling you a $4,500 starter bike. The real money is in the $20,000 touring rig, with the financing, the accessories, and the matching branded jacket. So the entire machine, from the boardroom all the way down to the showroom floor, is quietly nudging you up the ladder, away from the cheap bike and towards something that fattens everybody's bottom line. Real quick, if you're enjoying this little investigation so far, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. I dig into stuff like this every week. Okay, back to our suspects, because there's a third one, and it showed up recently to make absolutely everything worse. Suspect number 3 is the accelerant, the gasoline on the fire. First came the post-pandemic chaos, where the cost of basically everything, parts, shipping, raw materials, all of it shot through the roof. And then came the 2025 tariff mess. The US rolled out a broad baseline import tax, somewhere around 15%, on most goods coming in from places like Japan and Europe. It wasn't aimed at motorcycles specifically, but guess what? Almost every cheap beginner bike happens to be imported. And even the bikes built here got hit because the steel, the aluminum, and the parts that go into them got taxed too. Harley alone reported around $67 million in tariff costs in a single year, most of it on raw materials and components, not finished bikes. Now, fun twist, a chunk of those tariffs actually got struck down in court in early 2026 and swapped out for new ones, because of course the story never stays simple. But the takeaway didn't change. Building and importing motorcycles kept getting more expensive, so the cheap bike was getting attacked from 3 directions at once. Regulations made it expensive to build. The big brands didn't even want to sell it, and the tariff chaos piled more cost on top. Which brings us to the part that actually matters. Because this isn't just about you paying a bit more for your first bike. This is about whether new riders even exist in 10 years. Here's the genuinely scary number. Back in 1990, the typical American motorcycle owner was around 32 years old. By 2018, that median age had climbed all the way up to 50 years old. The hobby is literally getting older every single year, and the young riders who are supposed to replace the older ones just aren't showing up. The share of riders under 18 collapsed. The 18 to 24 crowd shrank by more than half. And in 2025, new motorcycle sales in the US dropped by nearly 8%, one of the weakest stretches in a decade. Now connect the dots. The cheap, friendly, beginner bike was the on-ramp. It's how broke young people got into riding in the first place. Take away that affordable entry point, and you don't just lose a product off a shelf. You start strangling the entire pipeline of new riders. And over in Europe, it's arguably even rougher, because getting licensed over there isn't cheap either. In the UK, the training and tests just to ride anything decent can run hundreds, sometimes well over £1,000, before you've even bought a single motorcycle. Stack that on top of pricier bikes, and you've basically built a wall in front of anyone young trying to get in. And there is a darker side to all this too. When you cannot get your hands on a cheap, low-power starter bike, a lot of beginners end up jumping straight onto something way bigger and way faster than they have any business riding. And the safety data here is genuinely ugly. Research has found that the rider death rate on high-powered supersport bikes runs around 4 times higher than on the calmer cruisers and standards that beginners used to learn on. So pricing people out of small, manageable bikes is not just an annoyance for your wallet. It can actually get people hurt. Pretty bleak, right? But here is where this story finally turns around. Because the cheap beginner bike didn't completely die. It just packed its bags and moved east. While the big Western and Japanese brands were busy chasing fat margins and quietly abandoning the budget rider, a whole wave of Chinese and Indian manufacturers looked at that wide open space and basically said, thanks, we'll take it. Take CF Moto, the Chinese brand that's been straight up exploding. Its global motorcycle sales jumped around 79% in 2024. North American sales shot up almost 50%, and it now runs more than 700 dealers across the US. Their little 300 NK naked bike, around $4,200, walking right into the gap the Japanese left wide open. Then there's Royal Enfield, the Indian brand that sold 1 million motorcycles in a single year, with simple, affordable, characterful machines like the Hunter 350 that you can grab for around $4,300. Even KTM, which crashed hard into court-supervised restructuring back in late 2024, buried under a mountain of debt and something like 265,000 unsold bikes piling up in warehouses, ended up getting rescued by the Indian giant Bajaj, the very same company that's quietly been building KTM's small bikes for years. And honestly, Even the old guard hasn't completely given up. Honda still sells the goofy little Navi for around $2,000, which is hilariously cheap and by every account, an absolute blast to ride. So maybe extinct is the wrong word after all. The cheap beginner bike didn't vanish. It just got smaller, picked up a new accent, and kept right on rolling. The dream of the affordable first bike is still alive and kicking. It's just not coming from the brands you'd expect anymore. So here's where we landed. The cheap beginner bike got squeezed by emissions law, ditched by manufacturers chasing bigger profits, and taxed at the border all at the same time. But riders voting with their wallets are keeping it alive through a hungry new crop of brands that actually want to serve them. If you want more deep dives into the stuff the motorcycle industry would quietly rather you didn't notice, subscribe and stick around.